All right. Thank you so much, Alex. Should I call you Alex or Alexandra? What would you like to
Oh,
prefer?
Alex, please.
Alex. Okay.
Definitely Alex.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you so much, Alex, for coming and giving me your time.
of course. I'm happy to be here with you.
Thank you. Please tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? In which country, which city, and what was your childhood like?
Yeah, so I grew up in a very historic place in central Mexico. It's called Cholula, Puebla. It's about 2 hours away from Mexico City on the other side of the very famous volcanoes, the Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. And it's historic because there's been people living there for almost 3,000 years. And that's where my dad is from. That's where he grew up. He's the oldest of eight. We have a really, really large family there. And my twin sister and I were born in New York. That's where my dad and mom were living at the time. And when they found out that they were having twins, they were shocked. And eventually they moved back to my hometown when we were about 4 years old. So that's where I spent most of my childhood and adulthood until I moved to the US in my late 20s. And my childhood was a bit complicated. My parents had a corner store in the local market. They were small business owners. We owned and operated that store. So that's where I spent most of my childhood. And it was nice. It was routine. It was hard work. It was family, lots of family in the market too. And I notice in my life, I still bring a lot of that experience and just like how beautiful it is to make connections with folks every day. Even the small ones, even just like saying hi when you're sweeping outside. And we struggled financially and family wise too. It was not easy. But we also had like really happy and beautiful moments, mostly in nature, spending time again, like hiking by the volcanoes or going to like the community pools.
So, what is it like to have a corner store in Mexico, where you were from? I cannot pronounce the city's name, or versus having one in, suppose, Wisconsin or Ann Arbor, Michigan. And how do you people connect in Mexican society versus American society over around a corner shop?
Yeah. It's very flexible. So like I remember when we first started, our business was like kind of like a mini grocery store. So we sold everything from like soda pop to like brooms and seeds and things that you needed to like cook with. But it adapted a lot. So like depending on what folks would come in and ask for, my dad would like make notes and start bringing other things in. So there wasn't like, it wasn't very formal like it would be in the States. Like you would need to go through a permitting process and change the type of business that you had. Ours just kind of like slowly adapted. So by the time that I was like eight, nine, our store was more like a hardware store. And we sold a lot of things to, and most of the people that would come from even smaller towns around Cholula to buy things to, work the land with. And folks would come in and they tell you what they need, and it was almost like a therapy for what folks needed, right? You kind of ask like, what kind of thing do you need? What are you gonna like use it for? My dad was a jack of all trades. He knew a lot of different things, even though he only finished 6th grade. He was always a very curious person, reading a lot. And so like he would always either learn and give people tips from recipes on what to make to like how to use a certain tool in the land, because he would like bike out. He was an avid cyclist. So he would, for his like mental health and physical health, he would bike very long distances, and he would spend time with some of the folks that came to our store and buy, and he would learn like how they were tending to the land. So he would learn about the tools that we were selling, And he would teach us about those things too, as much as we were willing to learn. And yeah, it was just like a very adaptive process. And I noticed that I still do a lot of that, and I use a lot of those skills in my day to day.
That's very interesting. It's almost like he's not only selling those products, but he's also someone who can guide you through your project, right?
Exactly. Yes, absolutely.
So he's also like selling the intangible, like value.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think we don't recognize as much. I appreciate you mentioned value, right? Like we don't value that added expertise that someone's giving you as they're walking you through different types of ropes, and why it matters if they're made of one material versus another for the different kind of project that you're undertaking,
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where you form. It becomes more than a corner shop, right? Like you word, you use therapy. So people would
Absolutely.
come and ask for maybe some things that he doesn't sell any products for, like some family problems. He's gonna
Yeah,
say.
my dad was definitely, and it's funny now because my sister is a therapist, and
Right.
my dad and I'm a community organizer. So these are like foundational skills that we just took on
Right.
further along in our life. And yeah, my dad was a therapist. He wasn't good at taking his own advice sometimes, but he definitely was a person that everyone felt really comfortable talking to. And I remember when he passed away from a very like freak accident when we were 16. And it was devastating to our family because he was the oldest, and also to the community. And I remember we had a procession from my aunt's house to the church, which was a solid 1 mile. And it's customary to have processions sometimes when, people that we care deeply about in our community. I was surprised that they carried his casket the whole 1 mile.
It's
He
a
was
long,
not.
long. It was a long distance.
It's a long distance, and people would shift into it. It wasn't the same 8 guys carrying it. There was hundreds of people at his funeral. It was just an amazing show of all the relationships that he seeded throughout his life.
He was a well-loved man.
He was, and he died before he was 50. So that
So sorry.
speaks a lot too.
So when you moved to America, how old were you?
I was 28.
28. So you lived most of your life there, 25 years, maybe 24?
Yes,
Something like that.
25 years.
So for my formative years, most of the values, the memories and the expertise and language is all from there, right?
Yes. Yeah. And my mom, even though she's from the US, she moved to Mexico when she was 17.
Oh,
Yeah. So, and she met my dad in my hometown and spent a lot of time there. So she knew and knows my dad's family almost like her own family. And, it's funny because she didn't really grow up like speaking English with us, but what she did do was all of our media, so our books, TV, movies, they were all in English, and I think that helped. And in Mexico, you get to like learn English from a young age too.
so I already know, but the people who are watching this and not know, their mother is a Caucasian woman from the United States, right?
Yes, blonde, blue eyes.
Right. So, and your father is actually a Mexican man, right? Who was in America, but he married her and went back to Mexico.
Yes, it's very complicated. They were like in Mexico and then in the States and then back in Mexico. Like they moved around a lot between both countries. But yeah.
So your mother was 17 years old when she moved to Mexico. So you can say that she also sort of grew up in Mexico to some extent.
Absolutely.
She was like a child, literally. I mean,
yeah, and I say 17, she might have been younger. She might have been 16, but because I think she was 17 when she met my dad. So I think she moved a year before that. And my dad actually moved away from my hometown and moved to New York when he was 17. And he spent almost a decade in the States before he came back and met my mom in my
Wow,
hometown. Hmm.
nice. So you were much older and much more mature when you moved countries to America, like 28 years old, and you came here for college, right? Just for college,
Yeah, for my master's degree. Yeah.
master's degree, and then you have a job now, and you settled, right? You married and everything. So how does it feel to be living in your mother's country? I mean, you speak both languages equally well, and you feel like you belong here, or you think you can be both American and Mexican? How do you feel most of the time?
I've always been in between, and I don't even know if my mom would call this her country.
Oh, wow.
I think we both feel very much in between. And my mom is fluent in both languages. People don't know that she's American in Mexico. They actually think there's a small town of Italian immigrants from northern Italy close to my hometown called Chipilo. And the folks over there are known for being like blonde and blue-eyed. And a lot of folks would think that she was from there,
Right.
not that she was American. And so growing up for me, it was always a little bit of the two. And we spent our summers, we would travel to see my grandfather and my great grandmother, who was Danish, in Wisconsin and Michigan every summer. We'd spend a couple of weeks there. And growing up in a town that was so small and so rooted in our history, in our community, you know, I never felt like I 100% fit in. And I think the experience is the same being in the US. I think here, I never feel like I 100% fit in. I think because when I moved to the US, I lived in Michigan first, where I got my urban planning degree at Taubman College. And then I moved to Wisconsin. And those two places were very different from now living in Los Angeles and Pasadena, because I noticed that here I get to be a broader version of what Mexican American feels like in the US.
I think, yeah. I mean, so you have access to both cultures where you're now, right? More
Yes,
easily,
and many more cultures,
more cultures.
because
Yeah.
even within Mexican culture, it's very different. Most people here in Los Angeles are from like northern Mexico, which is really different from central Mexico. And so there's just different ways of being. And my husband and his family, they're from Peru. So we have like a whole like blended family now when it comes
Right.
to cultural, what we are pulling from every day.
Right. Right. The word you use, in betweenness, there must be a good amount of place to live in that in betweenness, right? There's a lot that can exist in that, and be okay. It's okay to not be this or that, and be both, right?
Yeah, and I find that most of my deepest friendships are with people that feel in between. And that can be all kinds of things. It can
Right.
be cultural, but it can be other identity traits. And
Right.
I think we find kind of that community and that strength within each other, which is really sweet.
I think that people can be, they don't really have to be in between in terms of two nationalities, but also, like you can say, career, two different careers, right? Or mixed heritage, or even sexual orientation. It can be in betweenness, or other ways. There are other ways to be in between, and you seem to connect with those people more than people who are like just one thing.
Absolutely. I love people with different shades and
Right. Right.
interesting, complicated pasts. Like,
Right.
give it
Right.
to me. I can trade stories. When people meet me, most folks are like, "Oh, wow, you've lived like a lot of different lives," and
Right.
I enjoy that. And I enjoy that. Like, I could tell you about how I tried to start a business and failed, or how I was a single mom during college and waitress to put myself through school, or, how I've traveled the world to learn about architecture and design. Like, there's so many things.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you does your daughter feel more American, Sam? Because I mean, the younger one is much more young to know who she is now, right?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Okay.
I think, and it's a tough one because, families and immigration statuses, everything's like
Mm,
complicated, right? But
right.
um, Sam's experience is much more American.
Mm,
And we do intentionally try to spend a lot more time back home and connecting her with friends and family that feel like home.
back home meaning in Mexico, right?
Yeah, back home in Mexico.
Okay.
But it's still so different. And for us, we grew up with a lot of scarcity and a lot
Hmm.
of feeling like on edge and
Hmm.
not necessarily a lot of stability. And so she's not experiencing that at all. And so sometimes
Right.
I get frustrated where I'm like, you're so privileged and you're complaining about something. And
Yeah.
then I just have to check myself and remind myself like this is one of the main motivations of why we left is
Right. Right.
how unsafe sometimes Mexico can be, especially for girls. And seeing her being able to grow up and enjoy her childhood, that has been the biggest gift. And being safe, like she's walked to school
Hmm.
since she was in elementary school,
Right.
or taken the bus and biked around, and
Right.
she's just happy. Yeah.
So you said Mexico can be unsafe for girls, right? For kids, or I mean, so you moved here so that she doesn't have to go through. But you also like to take her back to Mexico. And what are your hopes that what she would get from those trips? Like, of course, you're not going there to make her feel unsafe, so she can say, "Oh, I live in a safe society in America." What are you thinking that what is she getting out when she goes back to Mexico?
Yeah, and I don't think she feels unsafe when we're going back,
Mm,
or because there is that narrative, right, of
right,
like you have to be careful. And you should definitely, if you're not from there, definitely be careful.
right, right.
But it's more the day to day. Like I could go down a lot of experiences that I had as a young girl, and you just have to grow up so fast in Mexico, and you
Mm,
have to learn things in a really harsh way and go through a lot of violence to find your voice and advocate for yourself. It
mm,
is harsh. And so it's almost like a curated experience that my daughter now gets, right? Where
mhm,
I am providing that like safe space
mm,
and tailoring not in a very intentional way, but making sure that she is spending time with the people that I know to be safe and amazing folks, and not so much with the other parts that are harder.
mm,
And what I hope that she gets from it is a connectedness to her past
mm,
and a rootedness in her history and in our people. Growing up in Mexico, we went to a school,
mhm,
Jolistli. The name comes from the Nahuatl word for heart, which means yolot. And it was an amazing space for us because they taught us and they just wove into our everyday learning our indigenous roots
mhm,
and why it's important to keep that history alive. And I hope that she grows up with a sense
mhm.
of the importance of our culture.
Yeah, yeah, that's important to know where my mother grew up, and my grandmother. Spent a lot of time of her life with my father, and yeah, it's better to be connected than not.
Yeah, and then like even though we're far away, like if I'm having a hard day, I can call my cousin, and we can talk. And it's nice because she doesn't know anyone here. She doesn't have any emotional connection to whoever might have wronged me or frustrated me or have made me really happy. And I get to share those pieces of my life with the people back home too. And I want her to have that. And she does to a certain degree. Like, she's grown up with some of the folks in my family and some of our friends too.
This is very interesting. You said you can call your cousin in Mexico, right, to talk about whatever you want to talk about without thinking that she might be judging you or you are making her sad by sharing your story. You cannot do this in America. I mean, not you, but like anyone. Can people like call anybody? And why do you think it's easier to do with somebody who is a part of a different culture, who is Mexican? Or I mean, I can totally relate to you. I'm trying to ask you, why do you do that? Why can't you talk to anybody in
Yeah.
America?
That's so funny. I don't feel like Americans are like calling on the phone kind of folks. I think that might be a very different like culture thing. Because I do call people who live in the States but
Right.
are also
Okay.
Mexican.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that is just like,
What does that mean to Americans? Are not the people who you call on the phone and talk. So,
and I will say, like, where I live, I
right.
have a lot of close relationships where I will go out and we'll do a one-on-one and I'll pour my heart out and
Right.
I'll share the trials and, the successes too. Because I am a person that needs and enjoys to feel connected.
Right.
So I do have, and I'm very blessed and to have a lot of good friends that I can go on a walk with over here.
Right.
But
Brilliant.
it is nice to be able to have those long conversations. And I think it's just this like longing for home and knowing that someone is far from home. You kind of make that effort to check in with them and remind them that there's a thread that connects us. And that by just calling each other once in a while and having a very deep and long conversation, we're touching on that thread that's connecting us back home.
Right. Very interesting. And with like my other Indian friends who are from India or here or in India, you can just go, you can just open your heart and no problem. And they're there to listen. Here, you feel like you're making their time or life miserable by sharing your grief with them. You're also exposing yourself as weak or a loser or some kind of someone who's not sure what they want, and they're not they don't feel like safe enough to share that kind of thing. And if they want to do that, they have to go to therapist to pay. I mean, a therapist is like he's trained to do that, but you don't in India I can do this with anybody without paying them. Same thing. So can you relate to this?
Yes, it's so funny that you mentioned that because I found it very hard to connect with folks when we lived in the Midwest because I felt like the culture there and just the demographics, there's less of us around. So then it's harder to find the people that you could connect with. It took a while, and we did find, we still have friends that we get to see every year that are in Wisconsin and not so much Michigan, but yeah, I find that there is something within the predominantly white culture that disassociates each other, that doesn't want us to connect, that doesn't want us to share the realness of our lives. And I'll be honest, if we can't be real, if you can't like hold the good and the bad in my life with me, we're probably not going to be friends.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, and the only way to really do it is by trying. So that's the hardest part, is that I've been in situations where I've poured my heart out And people are like, ooh, absolutely not. Or even
Mhm.
worse, like actually cause me harm using information that I shared with them.
Oh wow.
And that is, devastating.
Mhm.
But the reality is, unless you keep trying to make those connections, you won't find the gems. And there are so many beautiful gems. Like,
Right.
I am so, again, I can think of so many friends that I'm like, I'm so glad
Right.
you crossed that space and we get to like be in this together.
Right. So that beautifully said that if you are not going to be real with me and let me real be with you, we cannot be friends. Like you can call us friends, but we're not really friends, you know.
Oh no, don't even call me friend. We'll be acquaintances,
Yes,
but
acquaintances. Yeah,
that's
right,
about it.
right. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. And these are some very interesting conversations, and people like us can understand. Life, living life in between. I'm gonna thank you very much, and I will stop the recording.
Thank you so much, Deepak. It's always lovely to check in with you. Thank you so much for this time together.
Thank you.